Family abandoned me because sis blames me for her divorce. But one email changed everything. Almost 7 years ago, my family completely cut me out of their lives and threw me out of the house. Back then, I was just 22, barely making enough money to support myself, let alone afford my own place. The whole thing happened so fast that I had no time to process it, mentally or financially. And the reason behind all of this? My sister, Hannah, and I were never particularly close, mostly because of the 10-year age gap between us. She got married to her boyfriend, Pete, when she was 27, and they were together for 3 years before everything fell apart. Their marriage ended after she accused him of cheating with one of my friends. At the time, I was still living at home after college, trying to save up before moving out, and my parents had been totally fine with it. That is, until Hannah came home one day, completely hysterical, claiming she had filed for divorce because Pete had been unfaithful for 6 months. Then, out of nowhere, she turned on me, blaming me for introducing her husband to the woman she believed he had an affair with. Emily, the friend in question, was trying to gain weight, and since Pete was a certified dietitian, he agreed to help her. I was the one who introduced them, but I never imagined it would lead to something like this. I could hardly believe it. Emily and I weren't super close, but I knew she wasn't the type to mess around with a married man. And Pete? He was absolutely devoted to Hannah, always talking about her like she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The whole thing just didn't add up. Despite the lack of any real proof, my parents believed Hannah instantly. I get it. They were always going to take their daughter's side over their son-in-law's. But what I couldn't understand was why they were so quick to throw me out, too. Hannah came home, had a complete meltdown, and somehow convinced them that I had ruined her marriage just by introducing 2 people to each other. And just like that, they decided I had to go. I tried to reason with them, but they wouldn't listen. They told me I had until the end of the day to pack my things, or they'd throw me out themselves. I lost everything, my home, my family, in a matter of hours. I remember sitting on the sidewalk with my bags, sobbing, completely lost. After about an hour, I finally pulled myself together and crashed at a friend's place for the night. For days, I tried reaching out to my parents, but nothing. My friend let me stay with him until I could find an apartment, but my parents had already made up their minds. I was guilty in their eyes. When they kicked me out, they even said they were disgusted by what I had done, which made no sense at all. It wasn't like I was the one who had an affair. They blocked my number, refused to answer my calls, and when I tried to visit, my mom threatened to call the cops if I didn't leave. That's when it finally hit me. They really meant it. They actually believed I was responsible for everything. Honestly, I shouldn't have been surprised. Hannah had always been their favorite. My parents never planned on having a second child, and growing up, I was constantly pushed to the side. It never really bothered me, at least, not until now. Looking back, maybe I should have seen it coming, but really, who could have predicted something like this? I spent weeks trying to make sense of it all. Since my family had shut me out completely, I had no way of talking to Pete either. He had blocked me too, which only made things more confusing. I tried finding him, but both he and Hannah had moved out of their house and gone back to live with their parents. I had no way to reach anyone. That's when I realized I had one last option, Emily. We weren't exactly close, but I needed answers. So, I met up with her and laid everything out. When I asked if Hannah's accusations were true, she was horrified. She denied everything, and I believed her. Emily told me she had only met Pete a handful of times, and only in a professional setting. There had never been anything more between them, and she had no idea why Hannah would say something like that. To make things even clearer, she revealed that she had been in a steady relationship for years, and was actually engaged. She even showed me pictures. Everything she said made so much more sense than the baseless claims my sister had thrown around. I had no solid proof, but deep down, I just knew Hannah had been lying about the real reason behind her divorce. Without any evidence, though, there was no way I could go back to my family and make them listen. And back then, more than anything, I wanted to go home. I missed them, despite what they had done to me. But as time passed, I learned to let go and move on. I found a place of my own, buried myself in work to keep my mind occupied, and focused on paying the bills. It wasn't an easy road, and I was hurting, but I had no choice. I had to keep going, with or without them. Years went by, and now my life is in a much better place. I moved out of that tiny apartment into something bigger, built a solid career, and just last week, I got engaged to my girlfriend of 2 years. That engagement post? It changed everything. Because just days after we shared it, I got an email out of nowhere, one that finally gave me the truth about Hannah's divorce, with undeniable proof to back it up. Liza, my fiancée, usually only posts about us on Instagram, but this time, our engagement picture made its way to her Facebook. Since her account had a wider reach, the post ended up getting a lot of attention, including from my ex-brother-in-law, Pete. Turns out, he and Liza had actually met at a seminar a few years back. She's a doctor, and they had connected professionally, leading to them adding each other on Facebook. That's how he found me. And for once, I was actually glad the world was this small. A few days after the post went up, Pete reached out. Not through social media, though. Instead, he sent me an anonymous email. Later, he explained that it just felt easier this way. So many years had passed, and he didn't want to seem like he was still hung up on the past. Plus, considering he had been the one to block me back then, he felt awkward about suddenly getting back in touch. The email itself was mind-blowing. It laid out the full truth about what really happened 7 years ago, and as I read through it, I could hardly believe my eyes. Hannah had been the one cheating, not Pete. The entire story she had fed our family was a massive lie. And to make things even more twisted, she had been cheating with one of my friends, the exact same thing she had falsely accused Pete of doing. My friend Frank, who worked as a cashier at a grocery store near Hannah's house back then, was the guy she had been sneaking around with. I never would have made the connection myself since I had never even seen them together. They had kept their affair well hidden, but not well enough for Pete to miss it. When he confronted Hannah, she did what she does best. She shifted the blame. She claimed I had set the whole thing up, introducing her to Frank under the guise of helping him with his music career. Hannah was a decent singer, and Frank was an aspiring artist, so she used that as an excuse. And then she went even further, telling Pete that I had helped them keep their affair a secret all along. Every single word was a lie. I had no clue anything was going on between them. Pete, of course, was furious. In the heat of the moment, he cut off my entire family, blocking everyone, including me. He admitted that doing that was probably a mistake, but at the time, he was just too angry to think rationally. He didn't want the email traced back to him, so he kept it short and impersonal, but he attached something that left no room for doubt. Proof. Screenshots. Tons of them. Emails between Hannah and Frank, where they openly talked about how easy it was to fool Pete. Confessions of love, detailed plans about where they were going to meet next, everything. And to top it all off, Hannah had even signed off with her middle name, something barely anyone knew. She was caught red-handed. There was no way she could deny this. I had a strong feeling the email had come from Pete, so I dug through Liza's Facebook friends to confirm it. When I found his profile, I reached out. We met up a few days later, and he filled in even more of the blanks. Apparently, he had learned about what my family believed from Emily, who had run into him a couple of years ago and asked him about the divorce. That conversation led him to find out the ridiculous story Hannah had fed everyone. Back when I first spoke to Emily, I had asked her not to tell anyone my side of things, and I instantly regretted it. If she had spoken up, Pete would have known the truth years ago, and I wouldn't have had to live with the weight of this for so long. Pete admitted that he had wanted to reach out to me back then, but he held back because, once again, he felt weird about it. Honestly, if the guy wasn't so easily embarrassed, I could have avoided years of unnecessary pain. But I forgave him. I needed his help for what came next, completely and utterly destroying my sister. And I knew he would be more than willing to help. Hannah had clearly lied to my parents just so she could secure financial support during her divorce, and she didn't hesitate to throw me under the bus in the process. She must have known that the moment I spoke to Emily, I'd figure out the truth. What I couldn't wrap my head around was just how selfish she was, especially considering we were family. It was obvious she never even tried to correct the narrative, and my parents just ate up every lie she fed them. She knew that if they ever found out she was actually the one who cheated, she'd be in deep trouble, and she just couldn't afford to take that risk. Well, too bad, because the truth was finally out, and I had every intention of using it to destroy her life, just like she had destroyed mine all those years ago. I wasn't sure if my family still lived in the same house, considering I hadn't been there in 7 years, but after checking with an old neighbor, I found out they hadn't moved. Even better, Hannah was still living there. That didn't surprise me one bit. She had always been lazy, and if she had the option to let our aging parents take care of her while she did nothing, she was definitely going to take it. 2 days ago, Pete and I decided to show up unannounced. My mom answered the door, and before she could even process what was happening, we walked right in. My dad and Hannah were in the living room, and for a brief second, it almost looked like we were one big happy family again. That didn't last long. The moment they registered our presence, their expressions turned sour. My dad immediately started threatening to call the cops if we didn't leave, but I shut that down real quick. I told him he was welcome to do whatever he wanted, but only after he took a look at the documents we had brought. My parents were confused, but Hannah, she looked like she was about to throw up. She tried to excuse herself and go to her room, but there was no point in running. She was caught, and she knew it. Pete laid everything out on the table. The divorce documents, the screenshots of her emails with Frank, and I filled in the gaps with the real story. He even threw in the detail about how she had to give up our grandmother's diamond ring in the settlement, since she couldn't afford to pay him, which meant she had to sell it. That was the final nail in the coffin. Watching my parents' reactions was almost entertaining. My dad turned to Hannah, demanding an explanation. But even with all the evidence staring her in the face, she still tried to lie her way out of it. That didn't work this time. My dad had had enough. He packed up her things, handed her the bags, and kicked her out on the spot. Then, just for good measure, he turned to Pete and me and told us all to get the hell out of his house. I wasn't about to argue. I left with Pete while my sister stood there, begging them to let her stay. It was almost poetic, really. 7 years ago, I had been in her exact position, begging them to let me stay, and they hadn't even hesitated to throw me out. This was karma at its absolute finest, and I had never felt more satisfied. Fast forward a couple of days, and Hannah somehow managed to track me down. She showed up at my place, demanding that I fix things with our parents. I have no idea how she even found my address, but I didn't care. I told her, plain and simple, that I didn't owe her anything. She ruined my life once, and all I did was return the favor. Now we were even. She had absolutely no shame left because the second I said that, she broke down sobbing, calling me a monster. I wasn't interested in her theatrics, so I shut the door in her face. I put on my headphones, ignored her crying, and went about my day while Liza worked in her study. Eventually she left, but not before scribbling a message on my door with a marker. Something about me being a vengeful monster. I can't say I feel bad. Honestly, I don't think I did anything wrong. I didn't lie. I didn't manipulate anyone. I just told the truth, something she should have done from the start. But somehow, in her mind, I'm still the villain. So what do you guys think? Am I the asshole for ruining my sister's life after she destroyed mine all those years ago? Update. A week has passed, and Hannah is still harassing me. I lost count of how many times she's called, but today alone, she tried 14 times. I finally had to threaten her with a police report to get her to stop. I still don't know how she managed to get my number, but at this point, I don't even care. She's been trying to make me feel bad, saying she can't afford to live on a school teacher's salary. But let's be real, she's not struggling. She just hates the idea of having to be independent. Now that our parents aren't there to take care of everything for her, she actually has to be an adult, and she's pissed about it. Speaking of our parents, they're just as bad as she is. After years of ignoring me, they suddenly found me on Facebook and saw my engagement post. And now, out of nowhere, they want back in my life. They haven't apologized, haven't acknowledged what they did, but somehow, they think they deserve an invite to my wedding. I have no idea where these people find the audacity, but at least I'm not falling for it. Liza and I have been having a good laugh reading their messages because, honestly, the whole thing is just pathetic. I've moved on, and I don't need them anymore. They made their choice 7 years ago. Now I'm making mine. Update 2. Hannah showed up at my house again, even after I threatened to report her for harassment the day before. I was about to head to work when she threw herself across the hood of my car, refusing to move until I spoke to her. It was beyond exhausting, so this time, I actually called the police. They took her away while she screamed, cried, and tried to make me look like the villain, but no one was buying her performance. It took a bit of time to press charges, but once that was done, I went straight to work and refused to let her antics ruin my day. I knew my parents would bail her out anyway. She's always been their favorite, and, of course, I was right. Not long after, they sent me a long-winded message about how I was being too harsh over an honest mistake they made nearly a decade ago. I couldn't help but laugh. There was nothing honest or accidental about what they did. They knew exactly what they were doing when they kicked me out, fully aware that I had nowhere else to go. They made their choice back then, and now I was making mine. I texted back, reminding them that they'd lost any right to tell me what to do 7 years ago, and that they should stop deluding themselves. I didn't even bother blocking them right away since I hadn't had time to check my messages, but I knew I would soon. Hopefully, that would be the last I ever heard from them. Update 3. After getting home from work, I finally checked my socials and found yet another long message from my parents. Liza and I read through it together, and honestly, it was the funniest thing I'd seen in a while. At this point, they really don't seem to understand that I'm not even hurt by their nonsense anymore. I'm just entertained by how ridiculous and out of touch they are. Apparently, they still think we're family, and have decided to take Hannah back in, as if that was ever in question. And because they've forgiven her, they believe I should also let bygones be bygones. They even invited Liza and me over for dinner so we could sort out our differences in a civilized manner before the wedding. The audacity is unreal. Bold of them to assume I'd ever want them at my wedding in the first place. After Liza and I finished laughing at their absurdity, I replied one last time. I told them I had zero interest in anything they were inviting me to, and that I was perfectly fine without them, just like I had been for the past 7 years. They had already proven that I was better off without them, and for that, I'd always be grateful. I didn't need them, I didn't want their so-called forgiveness, and they could go right ahead and continue their little, happy family routine with Hannah. With that, I blocked them for good. At this point, I didn't even need the entertainment anymore. I was done. I know they'll probably try to get back in touch with me at some point, but it won't matter. If they ever try anything again, they won't be talking to me. They'll be talking to my lawyer. And that's a promise.